I'm Brenda McCrae. Thanks for joining me in this course, Adoption, What You Need to Know. This is a different way of presenting information with you to me, and I really like it. Please feel free to leave comments. If you notice on the side of your screen, you'll see a place for comments. You can ask questions, give opinions. The more feedback, the more interaction, the better. I check this site at least once a week, and we'll be happy to respond and interact with you. Also, please keep checking Udemy because I'm going to be adding courses continuously. Some will be free, the FASD course will be free, and some will be for a fee. So do check back. I think you'll find pretty much there's going to be anything you can think of to do with raising children will be presented through Udemy. So to start, I guess, about my qualifications, I do have a PhD, and I've been a practicing therapist specializing in adoption for about 30 years. I'm also the parent of 14 kids, grandmother of 8, and 12 of my kids came to us through adoption. So probably whatever experience you're living, I've lived it or am living it as well. And that's part of what I like to share in the interactive part of this course. So I put this together. I've written some books and I do workshops all over, but I thought that I wanted to make something that parents could do in their own time. So if you're feeling frustrated or you're feeling like I just need to get a better grasp of what's going on in my family, this way of presenting the information is going to be for when you want it and you need it. I'm going to be referring to my notes from time to time because I want to stay in line with the slides that you're seeing. So let's get started. And I think where it all starts with adoption is abandonment. And I think that's a vastly underlooked or overlooked part of it. Abandonment is really an experience that human beings aren't equipped to manage. And I'm not even talking about the kind of abandonment where a child's left in a back alley alone to be found, as one of my own children were. That's a brutal and horrible enough thing as it is. But the simple act of being transferred from your genetic parent to any other parent is an act of abandonment. We aren't equipped for that. We're born and genetically designed to stay with the people in whose body we developed. And the original act of moving us on creates a level of stress that we don't have the capacity to deal with. Now let's keep in mind too, that most of the kids that we adopt, at least in North America, the children who were adopted, usually, or nowadays, most are going to come from foster care. And most of those children will have been prenatally exposed to drugs and alcohol. Most of those children will have experienced some degree of neglect and or abuse. That creates an overwhelming amount of cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and that creates an overwhelming amount of it in the brain. The bad part of that, well, one of the millions of bad parts of that, is that the brain has to develop the capacity to manage cortisol. And if everything's just great, you have a safe, healthy pregnancy, there's no problems postpartum, everything's wonderful, baby's getting all the care, then the stress regulatory systems are going to develop along the way. But our children don't come from that. Our children had probably some toxic stuff shoved into their brain or floated into their brain through the bloodstream prior to birth, and then, as I said, neglect and abuse following birth. So they start out with what they should, which is an undeveloped ability to deal with stress, and then they don't get the care and the parenting they should be getting in order to manage the stress. I do go into more detail in that later, so I'm not going to go on and on about it now. But because of that, they have no ability to manage their feelings around abandonment. And of course, they're pretty little when that starts. It might start 5 minutes after birth. Some moms are okay for the first year, or some moms are okay till a new boyfriend comes along who's not so great. Some moms are okay until life gets too overwhelming for them, or the drug addiction sets in, whatever. Any number of factors can happen that can make it so that a mom copes for a little while and then can't for after that. But at some point, her ability to care is going to be removed. The child's going to feel abandoned, they're going to feel overwhelmed, they're going to have overwhelming cortisol going through the brain, no ability to deal with it. This also starts pre-verbally, and the brain likes to be able to link feelings to words. That's part of how it keeps itself sane. And of course, when this is happening to you before you have words or concepts of words, then it's just hitting those brain parts, hitting the amygdala, hitting the hippocampus, the other parts of the brain, and again overwhelming it with no place to make it settle, no place to give it a narrative that gives it some feeling of sanity or stability. So you've got a hard life experience right from the beginning. And abandonment can happen in stages. So as I said, mom starts out okay, but then kind of gets not so great and not so great, and worse and worse and worse as supports disappear or whatever happens in her life. And then there's the final, or one of the first, but the big abandonment when the child's right out of her care. So it isn't always just a woo, what happened to me. It's bit by bit, but increasingly overwhelming, increasingly stressful, and with no way to cope with it. So we can't fool ourselves when we adopt a child to think that abandonment isn't the big deal, because it is the big deal. Most of our kids also go into foster care, and then they have the repeated experiences of abandonment. They have moves, they have different caregivers. You know, I never quite understand when I'm asked to help children attached to their foster parents, because, well, first off, attachment is something we'll talk about later too. I mean, that takes a level of brain development that most of our kids don't arrive anywhere with. And it also seems like a really cruel trick, because foster care is not meant to be permanent, it's meant to be temporary. So while you're trying to get this child who's probably starting to build some defenses and say, okay, I'm just going to stay inside myself a wee bit, and I don't mean catatonic or totally withdrawn, but just saying, you know, I'm not going to start believing this stuff. That's a healthier way for a 2 or 4-year-old or 10-year-old to be than saying, oh wow, you're my mommy now, I'm going to give you everything I've got, and then boom, another abandonment. But either, however it goes with the foster parent, the child is going to probably get moved. They're probably going to get returned to mom a few times, maybe onto grandma and grandpa for a little while, maybe an uncle and his family take them in. They get moved around a lot. And so each experience is an abandonment. And for those children who are a little bit more fragile and not able to protect themselves from the changes, the constant transferring of care, they do start to put out feelings of bonding, something like, okay, I'm here, this is where I'm going to belong. And of course, that's what everybody says every time they send the child somewhere. Well, don't worry, we're going to take care of you now. If the child believes that, then it's a whole tsunami of abandonment feelings then when they have to move on. So don't think of abandonment then just as that very first experience from birth, mom. It's every single time there's a change in caregivers. Also, abandonment starts to become their reality. It becomes the frame to every experience that they have. Everything is about how they react to that original and the subsequent abandonments. So even coming to you as an adoptive parent, that's still within the frame of the abandonment experience. One of the other problems the children run into is that we don't talk to them about abandonment. And there's some reasons for that. I mean, it's kind of hard to say to a child, well, how are you doing with your abandonment feelings today? You're not going to do that to a 2-year-old. You're not even going to do that to a 12-year-old. But they have that living within them, that lived experience of abandonment, of all the abandonments that have happened and the ones they know are coming down the road. So everybody tiptoes around it. We might call it attachment problems, we might call it behavior disorders, we might call it inability to regulate emotions or regulate stress hormones, whatever. Yes, it is all of those. But it's also not having words to help them define what their experience is about. And I think therapists have to take a lot of the negative credit for that, because we don't like to use that either. And we train parents to say all the nice things like, oh yes, your mommy and daddy loved you very much, they just couldn't take care of you because they had drug addiction problems. Or, you know, it could be that they're from some war-torn country in another world or another part of the world, and they died, or the poverty was so terrible that they simply couldn't feed their child. I mean, none of these are things that a parent plans. Nobody plans to be a drug addict and have babies. Nobody plans to be in a war-torn country and can't even take care of their child. So it isn't about intent, but it is about the result. And so we pretend that it's all nice, that everybody was happy and sweet, and that's, I mean, we have to do that. We have to protect the children to some degree, but also to some extent, we still have to own up to their reality. We can't be giving them that kind of conflicted emotional state where they're feeling, as I said, framed by abandonment, and we're making it all sound so nice, as if everybody's happy, both parents are happy, this happened, oh gee, everything. So, you know, one of the things that happens is that we continue to, as we continue to deny the child's reality about abandonment, their own feelings, their lived experience of it, with that denial around it as well, starts to become anger for them. And you can guess where that anger is going to go. It's going to go to us, the adoptive parents. Where else is it going to go? It's what we're there for. We're there to take care of them. We're there for them to react to learn from, and we're there for them to put out their feelings. And I think a lot of times, for me as a therapist, I get referrals around behavior disorders, and I think, you know, I'm not sure this is really a behavior disorder. I think maybe this is just the kid lashing out. Now, one of the things that we like to think is that abandonment is cured by adoption, and in truth it isn't. They still have all those original experiences, and yes, adoption cures or prevents future abandonment, or it should at least, and it provides stability, consistency, nurturing. It should provide everything that the child's brain is going to need to start to develop properly and to recover from the years of neglect and change and lack of a stable, caring parent. But it isn't going to fix that original experience. And it probably isn't going to take away the fear that it's going to happen again. And why should it? You know, life is impermanent. People die. Loving adoptive parents die. They get divorced and one of the parents moves out. All kinds of things can still happen. So we can't even actually promise the child that there will never be another abandonment. And I think that's a reality that we again tend to deny. That we say to them, we're your forever family. We are here. Nothing will ever change. This is it. Everything's going to be happy now. Well, you know what? It's not. And a part of this child knows that very well. And I think the more that we buy into that myth, and the more we try to pretend it, and the more we try to live some kind of fairy tale, the more you've got the abandonment frame with the child being formed around all the experience. One of the things that we often see is that the child does kind of, you know, they do okay in foster care, not a big problem. Then they move into the adoptive family, and after a few months, typically 6 months to a year and a half, boom, it all starts to blow up. And the social workers may be saying, no, we never saw these behaviors when they were in foster care. He did really well in foster care, so it has to be you, the adoptive parents, who are doing things wrong. But usually what I find is that what's happening is the child's starting to think, oh, maybe this is permanent. Well, nothing really lasts for me, so I better get out of here before they abandon me. It's too much of a threat. And so the original feelings of abandonment start to surface because they're safe and stable, and things are consistent enough that they don't have to repress those feelings anymore. So that comes out as a big whack of behaviors. towards the adoptive parents. It could be, as I said, that they're saying, well, I'm going to be out of here before you get rid of me. I'm not going to let other people abandon me anymore. I'm going to do the abandoning. But I take that after the honeymoon stage, and when they really start to act out. If they're acting out more than in the adoptive home than they did in the foster homes, then I see that actually as a place for real potential. I see that as real health, because that says to me, oh, they're starting to relax here. They're starting to drop their defenses. Now is the time when we can start looking at the abandonment issue. And I'm going to say over and over, we can't resolve it for them. That's something that usually people have to deal with for a long time. And sometimes they have to be adults before they have enough perspective and enough cognitive processes to be able to find a way to make that fit into their life and not be the determining factor in their life. And that's okay. We can't fix everything while they're growing up as much as we'd like to. But what we can do is respect it. So when that acting out stage comes, when they're starting to relax, and they're starting to let you know what it feels like to be them, then we can do some work on it, not panic, understand it as health, and go directly for what it is. So, I want to know what an abandoned person feels like. Who knows? Maybe you are an abandoned person, but everybody is different. So the way you experienced your abandonment may not be the way your child is. And you've got to be careful not to project your experience of it and your feelings of it onto your child. Don't assume you know what they feel like. What I'm going to tell you now is what many adoptees tell me, and so the words they use. But it isn't the same for everybody. Let's be real clear about that. The words they typically use are angry, frustrated, scared, but mostly what they tell me is they feel crazy, or they felt crazy, because they feel so alienated, so alone in the world, and so afraid, so terribly, terribly afraid. And that's a fear they've lived with probably since before they were born. And it's hard to believe that a fetus can feel fear, but we know they experience stress hormones. So if they can experience stress hormones, I think some of that could be fear. That their being is in danger, that their life is threatened. So let's look at what you can consider. Stop and think about, how do you acknowledge your child's abandonment experience? Do you acknowledge it? What words have you ever provided to help them to link their feelings and their experience to abandonment? Do you have a good understanding of age-appropriate terms to use around abandonment? I mean, really, you're not going to say abandonment to a 4-year-old. Have you been abandoned? And how did you resolve that? Or have you resolved that? Because that's going to be, for parents, a real trigger. If that's something, if they've got that same frame of abandonment going on, it's going to be a real trigger for them to be dealing with their child's abandonment. And what's it feel like for you when your child acts out their abandonment? For a lot of parents, it feels like rejection. And, in some ways it is, because the child's protecting themselves by not letting the parent in emotionally. Here's some suggestions I've got for acknowledging abandonment. But again, remember, you're going to use age-appropriate terms, and you're not going to talk about this on a daily basis. We don't want to be hammering into them, you're an abandoned human being. What we just want to be doing is making it sort of open, making an awareness from time to time when you're in the right situation with your child. So don't be afraid to talk to them about the truth about why their genetic parents couldn't parent them. And yeah, you want to frame it nicely. You don't want them to make them feel unloved. And you can't ever dump on the adoptive or the birth parents, because then the child takes that on as you rejecting a part of them. But you can be clear. You can be factual about what you know. Maybe you don't know everything about why it happened. Maybe they come from a country where there was no records, or maybe they're from North America, but the records are still pretty unclear. But give them the facts that, however few or however many you do know. Use the words. If there's drug addiction, use drug addiction. If your little guy was left, found abandoned in an alleyway, or found abandoned at the steps of an orphanage, or in a rat-infested apartment, you can tell them that again at age-appropriate ages and levels. You can be saying, you don't want to say there was rats crawling all over your body, because that's really frightening and a horrifying image to give them. But remember, at some level they know that. Even if it happened at 6 months old, they know that happened. What you can be saying is, from what we understand, sweetheart, it was not a nice place. It was dark and scary and you were alone. Go into immediately, and we'll never leave you to be like that again. Now, I've said earlier that they're wary of those forevers, that they don't believe them. But there is a time and a place to use them. So if you're going to use a negative about explaining to them their experience of abandonment, you do want to come in with some reassurance. I mean, that's what they need. That's what we all need. We need that cuddle. We need that promise that it won't happen again. Even if it's maybe not quite hitting them, it's not going to cure it, it's not going to make the abandonment go away, but you're in that moment with them, and you need to be totally present and secure in saying to them that you are here now, that isn't going to happen to them now. And don't worry if the child doesn't respond. They don't all say, oh gee, thanks for giving me the info. You know, they're going to take what they can take and do what they can do with it according to their age and their ability to cope and integrate information. You're just putting it out there along with your love and your reassurance. Try to use the feelings that go with words. So, you know, if you're talking about you were found in a back alley in a box, you could say, I bet that was scary for you. I don't know, I wasn't there and I'm not you. But if that happened to me, I'd be scared. I might feel alone. I might wish so hard there was somebody there. You can project. That's safe to project then onto what it might be. Remember I said earlier, the brain likes to have feelings attached to experiences, or words attached to feelings and experiences. So put the words in. You don't want to say it in a way that this implies that that's what they had to feel, but you can say that you might have felt that way, or they might have felt that way. Any kind of therapy is good for this. I know everybody has their favorite therapies. I certainly have my favorites. The important thing about finding a therapist to help you deal with the abandonment issue or any other adoption issue is that the therapist truly understands adoption. If they tell you that they worked with many adoptive families, no, that's not good enough. I want to know how much real training you've had. How many adoption conferences do you go to a year? How many of the books? How many of the authors? Do you know who Daniel Siegel is? Do you know who Adam Pertman is? You know who, and, you know, like they've got to know the major players in adoption. And if they don't, then that's probably not the therapist for you. Adoption puts another layer over the original trauma, and so just being a trauma specialized therapist is not adequate to help your child deal with this. Abandonment, as I said, is not going to be resolved really, if ever, but certainly not to adulthood. So you're going to revisit this. And I would suggest that whenever you've had a smooth time and then things start to go rocky again, that what's actually happened is the child's, again, more of their defenses are dropping, more of their denial is dropping, and they're experiencing more of the abandonment. And so I would encourage you strongly at acting out times to see these as clues about the abandonment feelings starting to surface. Monitor your own behaviors too as a parent to see if there's anything you do that makes it sound like more abandonment. You know, do they hear conversations where you're saying, I don't think I can keep this child, I don't think I can raise them, or what have you. You know, that's going to trigger and create new abandonments. Just be really clear. And if they're new to your home and they're kind of little, be very clear, or, you know, kind of little, why am I saying that? 15-year-old gets as scared as a 2-year-old. Be clear if you're going away when you're coming back. maybe have a calendar out with your schedule on it every day. Routine is a wonderful thing because routine creates a predictability, and it goes some ways to resolve the fear of separation that happens every time you're going to leave. There's a lot of good books about abandonment. Of course, I'm going to encourage you to read mine. One of my fictions is called Good Enough, a Shay James mystery. It's a young adult book. I'd say it's good for about, if you've got a good reader, it's between about 10 and 15. And it's a fiction book about foster children. And I've tried to really address the issues of abandonment through a story that's worth reading or will entertain your kid. There's also The Road Home by Mary Jane Oush, From the Lighthouse by Liz Chapman. You can read for yourself what's on the slide. Bringing the books in, having books around that talk about abandonment in a way that normalizes it, or in a way that gives it a setting and a place and a way out, a way to resolve, or the hope of resolution, is a really good way to address it. And in some ways, most children's books are about abandonment. Certainly Snow White, I mean, she gets lost in a forest and adopted by 7 dwarves, or fostered by 7 dwarves. Cinderella, the same thing, her father dies. We have been writing stories about childhood abandonment forever, and they have happy endings, and that is really important. And I'm pretty sure your child's going to have a happy ending too. So that's it for the first section. Again, I really encourage you to leave comments and to interact with me. I will check it at least once a week. So I'll see you for section 2.